Welcome to Train Signal. This is the Configuring Threat Management Gateway Client Software lesson in the Forefront Threat Management Gateway 2010 training course. What is the Threat Management Gateway Client? That's the first question that we'll answer in this lesson. You'll then learn how to make sure that client support is enabled in the Threat Management Gateway console. Then we'll go over configuring what's called Web Proxy Auto Discovery. From there, we'll actually go through an installation of the Threat Management Gateway client software, and I'll show you how you can do that from the command line as well. We won't be doing too much actually with the client software in this lesson, as we'll be doing that later on in this course, but we want to get the client software installed as part of our baseline installation configuration for Threat Management Gateway. In order to get the most out of its investment, Global Mantic wants to make optimum use of Threat Management Gateway. They want to make sure the company's security posture is in top form as possible. And as part of this effort, the company plans to use the Threat Management Gateway client. For the initial testing and for the purposes of this course, Global Mantic will manually install the client software. You've been asked to be at least made aware of other deployment options with regard to the client. And you'll be expected to closely manage the Threat Management Gateway clients. You need to understand why the client is important. By the end of this lesson, you'll know that. You'll also learn how to ensure that client support is enabled on the server side. You'll learn how to install the client, and you'll learn how to take a look at and manage the client settings. So what does the client do? First of all, Threat Management Gateway can operate simplistically without a separate client being installed on each protected computer. And you got to see this in the previous lesson when we actually browsed a couple of websites, and you got to see that Threat Management Gateway was able to intercept some of that communication. However, the client adds some features, specifically application transparency via the proxy server. Any application, TCP or UDP, works by virtue of the client, and the application is completely unaware of the underlying communications channel, even if it's being put through Threat Management Gateway. This can reduce problems with some applications that require a secondary communications channel, such as streaming media servers. All client communication is authenticated, which adds an additional layer of security and allows administrators to enforce user and group-based authentication on network connections. Further, the client provides some additional user notifications that are useful to help users understand what's going on with regard to their internet traffic. In order to use clients in your Threat Management Gateway environment, you have to make sure that client support is enabled for the network on which you intend to have clients. By default, this is probably the internal network, and by default, this is actually enabled already, but we're going to go take a look at the configuration and make a couple of adjustments before we get started. This happens in the networking node, and you choose the Networks tab. The internal network is the one that's going to have Threat Management Gateway clients, so we go to the properties of that internal network, to the Forefront Threat Management Gateway client tab, and enable client support for the network. And we'll change anywhere where we see a server name to a fully qualified domain name, just for ease of troubleshooting later on. So let's go over to the Threat Management Gateway server for Global Mantic and take a look at this configuration in action. Here we are at the console, and you can see that I've already gone to the networking node and chosen the Networks tab. Here's the internal network, and we saw this in the previous lesson that this is an area that we'd be working with, but we can modify the properties of the internal network by right-clicking it and choosing Properties. And you can see that this is the internal network. Now let's go to the Forefront Threat Management Gateway Client tab, and you'll see that the option to enable client support is enabled. The only thing we'll do here is we'll make these fully qualified domain names. And we'll move on. That's all we really need to do here. And in order to apply these changes, we'll click Apply and OK. And now we actually need to save the changes to the configuration of the firewall itself. So we'll click Apply, and we'll put Client Change for a reason, and click the Apply button. And this will rebuild the configuration and enable those new options. And that's all there is to making sure that there is client support on the Threat Management Gateway side. We'll be actually coming back here in a little bit to do a little bit more configuration, but let's go back to the slides and continue on first. While we're here, there's some additional changes we can make on the Threat Management Gateway configuration that really make life a little bit easier for your users. First of all, there are some servers that shouldn't be put through Threat Management Gateway rules. These would include servers that are hosted by Global Mantic. So we can actually configure the Global Mantics domain to be excluded from the rule sets. And you can see in the little screenshot on this screen that you can bypass proxy for web servers inside the network, directly access computers that are specified in the Domains tab, and directly access computers that are specified in the Addresses tab without having to worry about the rule sets. Basically, you can directly access these local resources, even if they're in the DMZ, although we'll need to create a rule for that later on. So let's go over to the Threat Management Gateway server and make these adjustments in the Web Browser tab on the internal network properties. So we'll go back to the network properties, and we'll go to the Web Browser tab. Now let me show you what happens here. Right now we have directly access computers specified in the Domains tab, and on the Domains tab there are no domains. So here we can say we'll specify the domain names that belong to this network. Forefront TMG client computers will not use TMG when connecting to these domains. So we'll add the globalmantics.com domain so we can exclude it from some of the rule sets. Now in the Web Browser tab, we can also say directly access computers specified in the Addresses tab. So there's lots of different ways that we can get around some of these rules to make life easier for our users. One way we just did it was to add something to the Domains tab. One way we just did it was to add Addresses tab. And you can see that the internal network is automatically included already on the Addresses tab. So if there are any machines on the internal network, they're not going to be subjected to Threat Management Gateway. So we'll select that checkbox as well. And just if we wanted to add another entry for globalmantics.com here, but since we've already included it on the Domains tab, it's not absolutely necessary. star.globalmantics.com, click OK, and then apply. And that will exclude any traffic that's destined to a globalmantics.com address. To a globalmantics.com, or we need to click the apply button, provide a description. You don't have to provide a description, but for change management purposes, you should. Then click apply, and those changes will be saved out to the firewall configuration. Now let's talk about configuring Web Proxy Auto Discovery, or WPAD. What is WPAD, or Web Proxy Auto Discovery? This is a method by which clients will automatically locate the URL of a proxy server configuration file that may be out on the network. The Threat Management Gateway server will act as a proxy server for the clients on the network. So we're going to configure WPAD so that it can automatically discover their settings. There are a number of ways you can configure WPAD. You can add an entry to your DHCP server called option 252, but that only works if you're using a DHCP client. Right now, Global Mantics has all statically assigned IP addresses. You can add a WPAD entry to DNS. However, Windows Server 2008 DNS servers block WPAD entries, although you can reverse this blocking and make it work. Microsoft considers the most secure way in an Active Directory environment is to add what's called an Active Directory marker key for WPAD. This will not work if Threat Management Gateway is operating in a workgroup environment. Fortunately for Global Mantics, the Threat Management Gateway system is operating in a domain environment. So they're going to use the Active Directory marker option to configure Web Proxy Auto Discovery. In order to add the Active Directory marker, you have to actually download and install a tool called the AD Config Pack from the Microsoft Forefront Threat Management Gateway 2010 Tools and Software Development Kit. The link is on your screen. And you have to extract the contents of that tool set and install it. And then there's a tool inside there called TMG adconfig.exe. You'll run the TMG adconfig.exe with the command you see on your screen, and this will add the AD marker with the appropriate information that we need in order for clients to be able to use Web Proxy Auto Discovery. Then you can use the list command with TMG adconfig.exe to see that it was actually added. And what this actually does is creates a registry key in Active Directory that you can see on your screen. It's a service connection point for web proxy information. So we're going to go over to the Threat Management Gateway system for Global Mantics, and we're going to download and install the AD Config Pack. We're actually going to install it because it's already downloaded. And then we're going to run these commands to make sure that we get the web proxy auto configuration stuff in place. We're back over at the Threat Management Gateway system, and I've already downloaded the AD config pack tool that you can see here in Administrator Download. So I'll simply double click it to install it and click Run. Move past the splash screen, accept the license terms. We'll install the program files x86, Microsoft Forefront TMG Tools AD config. Click Next and Finish. That's all there is to it, folks. Not too hard. Now we'll switch to that directory, installation directory that we just installed to, and you'll see that we do indeed have tmg adconfig.exe sitting out there. So we'll type tmg adconfig, and the command that we saw is a part of the PowerPoint slide. Note that I'm running this under an administrative command prompt while logged in as the administrator user. Remember, we're making a change to Active Directory here. And I'll hit enter. And you can see that I get a message saying new WinSock default marker successfully registered. And if I do tmg adconfig list, you'll see that the entry was found. Now, we're going to go through installing the Threat Management Gateway client onto a Windows 7 machine for Global Mantic. We're going to do a manual deployment, as I mentioned before, but there's other ways you can deploy software in a Windows environment, including the Threat Management Gateway client. You can use System Center Configuration Manager, and if you're interested in learning more about Configuration Manager, I just happen to have created a System Center Configuration Manager 2007 training course for Train Signal, and there's a link on your screen if you're interested in looking at that course. You can also use a login script or group policy or third-party installation tools if you like to deploy the client out to your machines. For the purposes of this course, we're going to do it manually, and the installer is located in the client folder in the TMG download, the TMG installation location that we used before. So we're going to walk through the installation, and then we'll take a look at the client's connectivity to the Threat Management Gateway server. So I'm here on a Windows 7 machine, and you can see that I've already browsed to the location at which the Threat Management Gateway installation files were located, and to the client folder. And inside this folder, there's a file called ms_fwc. So we'll double-click this firewall client, and this will start with the normal splash screen that we see, the license agreement that we've gotten so used to. Click Next. And a default location for the client installation. And this is going to just be C:\program files Forefront Threat Management Gateway client. And click Next. We'll allow the installer to attempt to automatically detect the appropriate Forefront Threat Management Gateway computer. And then click Install. And finish. And what we're going to see down here now is that there's a new icon. And it did detect the Forefront machine. If I right-click this icon and choose Configure, we'll see that if we go to the Settings tab, that it actually did detect the Forefront Threat Management Gateway computer. If we click Detect Now, we will actually get to see that it was able to detect the Threat Management Gateway server. This is a good thing. Then we can go through the rest of the settings and see exactly what kind of settings are available. You'll see in the web browser we can enable web browser automatic configuration, and click Configure Now, and your web browser settings are successfully configured as per policies that are in place currently on the Threat Management Gateway server. And secure connection inspection is not something we're using yet, so we're not going to worry about this tab quite yet. If you don't want to see the icon, you can actually choose this box too, which will hide it when you're connected, but we're going to leave it open and invisible for the purposes of this course. If you click the Advanced button, you'll see that there's some additional options. The method used for automatic detection here was Active Directory, or we can also use other automatic detection methods based on DHCP and DNS, but we don't have those configured. We actually use the Active Directory configuration method. So click Apply, and OK. And everything works just the way it used to. We can still go out to the internet. We'll still have things blocked, just like we saw before. But what we've done is enable additional capability that we'll see unlocked later on in this course. If you want to set up the client installation through some automated tool, here's a command line that would help you accomplish this goal. We're not going to do this in a demonstration, but you can use the MXI exec, which is basically the execution tool that will install an MSI package, to install the software with all the parameters that you need. In this case, you're going to notice that there are 5 parameters. There's actually more than that, but let's take a look at the command really quick. We have msexec/i, which is install, ms_fwc.msi. That's the file we installed. The server name or IP is TMG1. This is the name of the threat management gateway server that we want to use. We have an enable auto detective 0, which disables auto detection to the threat management gateway server because in this case we use the server name or IP parameter. Refresh web proxy disables refresh of web proxy configuration. If you don't want to do that, put a 1 there if you want to enable that. You can do -reboot equals really suppress to not force a reboot in the event that the client is installed. Then if you want to log all the installation details, you use that slightly convoluted /L*V /fwc_inst.log or whatever file path you want to save the log to. And -qn will make the installer stay silent throughout the installation. Now this would be a little bit different than the process we went through because we did do some automatic detection stuff, but I thought it was important to show you the installation parameters in case you wanted to do this in your own environment. So what have we accomplished? First of all, you learned about what the Threat Management Gateway client can provide, although you really haven't gotten to see a lot of value yet, but you will see more value for the client later on in this course. You learned about enabling client support in Threat Management Gateway and got to see some parameters that you can set to make things a little easier. And although we're not using it quite yet, the web proxy portion of this, we learned how to configure web proxy auto discovery because that really is a very client-focused activity. You then learned how to install the client software, and we talked about a command line tool that you can use if you decide to deploy Threat Management Gateway's client via some other means. I also have some favor supporting resources, including installing the Forefront Threat Management Gateway software, some additional information on exactly what's accomplished by the Web Proxy Auto Discovery Protocol, and a link to the full Tools and Software Development Kit for TMG 2010. There's actually a whole lot of additional tools that Microsoft makes available for the software. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.